Well, before we start this video, the folks from California better brace themselves, cause it might get a little bumpy. We all have seen the obsession of Hollywood with making movies based on natural disasters hitting California. While they are a bit of exaggeration, but what if I tell you that it's not entirely based on fiction? What is San Andreas Fault? Now you may be thinking that what is the reason behind California being the location for most of these movies? Don't worry, I asked the same question to myself too after I watched Dwayne Johnson's San Andreas.
Oh my God.
After a little reading and research, I actually got my answer, which is a natural fault, which we call as San Andreas Fault. San Andreas Fault is actually a continental transform fault that extends for about 750 miles through California. It forms a tectonic boundary between the Pacific and North American plates with a horizontal motion. Simply, you can say that it's a fracture in Earth's crust that extends through extreme western North America. What's its history? The fault was identified in the year 1895 by Professor Andrew Lawson of UC Berkeley. Contrary to the common belief, he actually named it based on the surrounding San Andreas Valley, which is one of the major cities affected by the fault. Is the fault getting massive? A recent announcement made by the director of the Southern California Earthquake Center, SCC, tells us that the fault is in fact in a very critical state, meaning that the region can face a major earthquake in near future. There have been some earthquakes of smaller magnitudes, but the southern part of the San Andreas Fault hasn't experienced any major one since 1857, thus causing the development of substantial amounts of stress between these plates. The experts have signaled that this great amount of strain means that an earthquake of a large margin in the area is imminent. San Andreas Fault is actually what we call a transform fault, a fault where the relative movement of plates is predominantly horizontal. Earthquakes usually happen in the areas surrounding this fault because of the friction between the plates. At some points along the fault, the friction is greater, and as you all know, the greater the friction, the greater will be the development of stress. Now here comes the scary part. When this stress reaches a certain critical level, the fault ruptures. Man, even saying this makes shit scared, releasing all the energy and sending seismic waves that we feel as an earthquake. Seismic releases in past. Californians are known to face a few shocks time after time, and then again some minor earthquakes. However, some of them tend to be a little more than minor. After the identification of the fault, this fault has been responsible for earthquakes in 1906, 1957, and 1989, and then the last one came in 2004 with a magnitude of 6. The 1906 earthquake is known as one of the worst natural disasters to ever hit the United States of America. The death toll went up to a staggering figure of 3,080% of the city was totally destroyed. I mean, just look at the picture. It looks like a set from some Hollywood disaster film. The big one. In some parts of this fault, the tension has been building for almost 200 years with absolutely no release. Now at some point, these tensions will release and set a chain of devastating events to occur, which we call the big one. U.S. Geological Survey seismologist Ned Field recently talked about this, saying, "We think Southern California is locked and loaded, that the stresses have really built up, and when things start unleashing, they could unleash for years." The question that really tickles our mind at this point is, how big this big one would actually be? When is it gonna happen? And the most important one, are we even prepared for it? When will it happen? First of all, let's discuss the when part. Now on average, the San Andreas Fault ruptures every 150 years. The southern parts of the fault have remained inactive for about 200 years. Yep, not a good sign. Obviously, scientists can't predict when this will actually happen, but at this stage, it's fairly easy to say that it can occur at any point. How big will it be? Roads crack open with lava spewing from these cracks, huge skyscrapers coming down like they were made from a bunch of Legos, and whole islands go underwater when the ocean shows up with its huge waves. Scary, right? Well, finally a piece of good news for Californians, cause all of these events are a pure work of fiction and the actual disaster won't be this huge. I don't know why Hollywood hates California. Ironically, most of their studios are based here, but even the big one won't wipe off the whole state. The movie San Andreas depicted an earthquake of 9 magnitudes and a freaking tsunami, but the thing is, this fault can't give rise to a tsunami because it lies way in the inlands far from the ocean floor. Also, a 9 magnitude earthquake occurs when one plate is being forced below the other one, which is not the case in this fault. A sigh of relief. Prediction of damages. According to some recent predictions from experts, the possible maximum earthquake magnitude along the fault is 8, with a probability of 7%. Over the same period, there is a 75% chance of a magnitude 7.0 event. While still being quite disastrous, these events will be much less dangerous than the ones shown in movies. In an attempt to understand the reality of the effects of this event, USCGS modeled a 7.8 magnitude event with slippage of 2 to 7 meters to represent the stresses that have built up in the area since the last large event. From this model, it was found that damage would be most severe to constructions straddling the fault. Fortunately, constructions of this sort are few and far between, following following the 1972 Alquist-Priolo Earthquake Fault Zoning Act. The total cost of the damages occurring to these buildings will be about $33 billion, with older buildings being more susceptible. Most of the damage won't occur by the earthquake itself, but by the fires that'll erupt because of the ruptured gas mains and electricity lines. The total death toll is estimated to be around 1,800, and just when we'll think that everything is over, California will face massive aftershocks. For instance, Christchurch, New Zealand was hit by an earthquake of 6.2 magnitudes in 2011, and since then the city has faced more than 10,000 aftershocks. What can be done? One thing is for sure: you can't really stop an earthquake, nor can you delay it, but you can try to limit the damages and save yourselves and your pretty homes. In California, most of the buildings are constructed by keeping these shocks in mind, and they can withstand a little shaking of the ground. So that's a good thing. As Dr. Wine from USGS has said, while drop, cover, and hold on remains the best advice for what to do when you're in an earthquake, it's still better to be a little more prepared. The experts at USGS have developed a threefold defense to tackle this problem, with the first one being the construction of earthquake-resilient buildings. In some cities, all the old buildings are underway to be strengthened or torn down. The second line of defense involves the selective use of land to minimize the effects of hazardous ground. High occupancy or critical structures, for example, should not be placed astride the San Andreas Fault or in landslide-prone areas. And the third and final one will be the accurate predictions of these events. After all this nerdy, but essential, talk, we know for sure that California will face a major earthquake, but the good thing is that it won't be anywhere close to those movies, cause honestly not everyone has rocked to save them, so enjoy, but at the same time prepare yourselves, cause seriously we can't imagine the USA without Los Angeles.